Well, now that we have spoken about the various men that held the position of Master of Ordnance, in this second part we look at what exactly they were in charge of. The content of an artillery train is massive. I cannot overstate just how much was involved in the logistics of the movement and action of heavy guns. We have to remember that all of this would have depended on men and horses to move, and it would have required vast amounts of both on roads that barely existed. Four essential parts of the artillery train would have been your regular soldiers, the guns themselves, the horses, and then the specialists, who would have had specific jobs. Here are some of the jobs. Comptroller was basically an accountant. Commissary of artillery, who was responsible for buying the artillery pieces and sorting them. Paymaster, wagon master, the commissary of draft horses for pulling the cannons, the purveyor, quartermaster, provost marshal, military police for discipline, master gunner, along with his mates. You would have also needed surgeon, tent keepers, farriers, the guys to shoot the horses, they've got to be looked after, master carpenter, along with blacksmiths, master wheelwright, master collier maker, who would have had to make the collars for the horses. This is the big band that goes around the horse's neck, which the traces of the wagon are attached so they can be pulled. Master cooper, who would have made barrels to carry everything in. Gunners, kettle drummers. Not only all those guys, but we have also needed engineer officers, as engineers were seen as vital to artillery. As they were the guys who could build things, they were also seen as the guys who could take them down too as well. You had fire masters, petardiers. So petardiers might not have been used at Aughrim, but they probably would have been at Athlone, because these guys were in charge of a very small and very dangerous bomb, used frequently during sieges and that, to bring down doors and walls. Petard actually is a French word that comes from breaking wind. I think these things broke a bit more than wind. All of these fellas would have had their assistants. The metros, conductors, carters, pioneers, with a lot of civilians working as well among the train. There was also a specialist unit associated with the artillery train, and these were the fusiliers. The word fusilier comes from the 17th century French word fusil, meaning a type of flintlock musket, where they got this name. Basically, their job was to guard and escort artillery pieces, and they carried flintlocks rather than matchlocks, because these were less likely to accidentally ignite the open barrels of gunpowder and blow the whole train to smithereens. It wouldn't be good news. The other part of their job was to keep discipline among the drivers and ordinary troops of the train. This is because ordinary soldiers and civilians had often been hastily recruited, didn't have much military experience, and was less disciplined than the likes of the engineers and the more specialised guys. Okay, so we've looked at the men. Now, we'll have a look at the guns that probably would have been used at Aughrim. First up is one called Minion, and I'm not talking about the guys in this picture. The Minion was a type of a small cannon, and its name comes from the French word for cute, which, when fired, was not so cute. Minions were between 7 and 8 feet long, and weighed about 800 to 1,000 pounds. They fired a ball which was roughly 3.5 pounds, and required about 3 pounds of black powder to fire. Their point-blank range was 125 yards. Point-blank range usually refers to the distance in which the cannonball will keep going straight until it starts turning down towards earth. Next up is the Saker, and these would have been between 8 and 10 foot long and weighed about 1,400 to 1,800 pounds. These would have been transported by attaching it to a two-wheel limber, which would have been drawn by 3 or 4 horses. They would have fired balls weighing around 6 pounds and would have required about 4 to 7 pounds of black powder. A team of 8 usually needed to fire it effectively. They would have been able to fire 20 shots an hour. As for their working life, the bronze ones would have been able to fire indefinitely, but the iron ones, they were only good for about 1,200 shots, so you needed to keep account. 4 bronze English Stakers were sent to Ireland in 1689, and these were probably still in service with the Williamite artillery at the Boyne. I don't know if they made Limerick. There was a lighter version of these standard cannons called the Drake. These lads would have been capable of firing approximately about 4-pounders. They would use small charge. This is because their barrel had less strength and too much power would have split the barrel when it fired. Next we have the Demny culverins. These were some of the bigger type of cannons that may have been around. 10 feet long. They would have weighed between 2,000 to 3,000 pounds and would have fired a ball between 9 and 11 pounds in weight. The amount of black powder required to fire would have been between 6 and 8 pounds, and their point blank range was about 175 yards. As we have records saying that the artillery pieces used at the battle were 3-pounders, 4 pounds, 6 pounders, and 12 pounders, this probably covered most of the artillery pieces that were at Aughrim. So now we've talked about the guns, we'll now have a look at the type of shot they fired. So you can see from the list here, there is a huge variety of shot these guns were capable of firing. I'm going to stick with ones that were most likely have been used at Aughrim. First up, there's round shot, also called solid shot, cannonball, or simply ball. These are the ones that we're most familiar with. They're your typical cannonball, so they're a solid round projectile. And in the period we're looking at here, they were made up from iron. I've mentioned before all the different ball sizes, and if you get a chance to visit the centre in Aughrim, you can see the various sizes on display there. Next up is chain or split shot. So these were two balls which were linked by a length of chain or a solid bar. Mostly these would have been used at sea to slash through the riggings and sails of an enemy ship. It's been speculated that this type of shot could have been the one that took Saint Root's head, but in truth, it could have been any that are mentioned. Or it could even have been a piece of debris from a shot, like a tree branch. We can only guess at this stage, until we find the body. Next is shell. So shell are made of iron with a cavity packed with a charge of powder. These would have been used against an enemy battery to destroy wagons, breastworks, and the opposition's artillery. Next we have grape or canister shot. Grape shot and canister shot worked on the same principle and are probably one of the more cruel types of shot. Basically these work like a giant shotgun. There's lots of small lead balls which were placed in a metal can or canvas sack. When fired, spread out to be very effective against personnel. It was, however, only very useful at short range. Next we have carcass, which was essentially an early form of chemical weapon. This type of shot was made up of iron frame, bound with sackcloth and filled with various ingredients, such as pitch, sulphur, saltpeter and tallow, to name a few. This would have been fired, burst on impact, hopefully in front of your enemy, and release poisonous fumes, which also setting everything on fire. Pretty nasty. It's hard to say where it gets its name from, but it could be from the medieval practice of hurling dead animals as a form of biological warfare, or just for its resemblance to the human carcass. I'm not quite sure if much of that was used at Aughrim, but it's possible. Last but not least is the heated or hot shot. This was created by taking a solid iron ball and heating it in a specially designed furnace, and then loading it onto a cannon, fired while it's still red hot. The aim of this was to set fire to the enemy's defences. Interestingly, anyone who seemed to have a knack for bringing trouble down on themselves, or was deemed reckless, was often referred to as a hotshot, a phrase which is still stuck today. Again, not sure if this was used, but it could have been. So that's as much as I can say today. I hope you've enjoyed it and haven't bored you to tears. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube at 1691 Aughrim, which we update when we find information. If you want a guided tour of the battlefield, message us on Facebook or Twitter and we'll see if we can do something for you. Thanks for listening and hopefully see you all in Aughrim soon. Slán.